You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show, and we got to welcome Daryl back. You know, I've had to do the last couple of shows, and I got to say, I mean, it hasn't been the same.
Yeah, man, but you've carried on like a true champ that you are, so, man, I appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, and sometimes, honestly, you know, I'll say things like that, but it is actually kind of fun in a way to sometimes to do them. But I mean, obviously, you know, preferably I would I would like to not have to do them on my own. That would be, you know, kind of the goal. But we're here now. You know, we're live with you guys. We're both here. And I should say this at the top of the show, because as you can see, we're reviewing episode 7. Yes, I know episode 8 dropped. You know, we understand that. But again, for those who might not know, because of Darryl being in the hospital and everything, unfortunately, we had to delay doing this review because I didn't want to have to do the review on my own. So that's why I did the other two topics. So instead of combining the episodes, because we could have done that, we have done that in the past, but then the problem is that we can't really get into each of the episodes. And honestly, since these things live forever and ever anyway, the reality is that most of the people that are watching this, if they're not watching it, you know, within the next few days, all the episodes have been released anyway. So it really doesn't matter. It only matters right now because, you know, that's just the way it is. All right, so, you know, David, you know, it's weird because David's very rarely the first commenter. I've noticed that. Because usually he'll jump in. But, you know, he was glad that you're back. He says you look good. So glad you're okay.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Good to be back.
It's good. Yeah, it is good for you to be back. You know, it's kind of nice that I get to actually talk to somebody and not just the ether. But you know what? We got an episode to review. So this one is interesting because, again, this is another one of those that on paper, it's really good, and it uses a tried and true story trope that they always do, where they'll retell an episode, but from a different perspective. Now, sometimes they'll do it from the perspective of another character, but this time it was really more like from the Jedi's perspective versus the witch's perspective. You know, because before we were sort of seeing it through like Osha, May, and all the other, you know, witches or whatever. And then, of course, the Jedi came and they visited or whatever. That was episode 3. That was when we got that horrible, you know, power of one, you know, that stupid
we
chant.
We are the world, we are the children, whatever it is.
Exactly. Basically that whole, you know, whatever it is. But, you know, this time it's told from the perspective of the Jedi. And again, so this episode, I mean, I didn't dislike it or hate it by any stretch or anything, but it was just, you know, it was all right. I mean, I thought it was interesting that they were doing that because obviously they're trying to set things up. Obviously, we find out the answer kind of to the big mystery. It's like they did finally deal with, okay, you know, what went down during the fire and all that stuff. Although, honestly, I personally think it actually creates more questions in some cases than it answers. But you know, I mean, I thought it was cool. But you know, it still suffers from the same problems that you and I talk about all the time: bad writing, poor direction. You know, character. Another one we alluded to this, but we never really say it like this, but it's character motivation. I think that's another big, particularly with May's character a lot of times throughout the series that we've seen. But the character motive, and I guess that you could put that into the category of the writing. I guess you could just lump that in, because that really is a writing issue, but Yeah, some of the character motivation. And the other problem that I have, and I'm sure, again, that's going to be even magnified after the next episode, because again, Daryl, you've watched it. I haven't watched it, but I've seen so many shows on it that I know everything that happens. But
Hmm.
the biggest problem I think with this series, and this is something that I've talked about, and certainly we can wrap this into the discussion for tonight's episode, but there's really, it's like, well, what's really the point? You know, who are we supposed to follow? Uh what really is happening? Why should we care about any of this stuff? You know, I mean, it's like it's not a really cohesive story, really. Although, as I said at the beginning, if you were to put this all on paper, you would go, "Oh, okay, this is kind of cool." It's just, again, it was execution wise. But what'd you think?
Well, I think to your point, Eric, in regards to the motivation, I think once you watch the last episode, um, for me, the story got infinitely better.
Okay.
Like it by leaps and bounds, just the way that it kind of left me with. I mean, don't get me wrong, it still has some problems because why wouldn't it? But I think that the character motivation, though, and I think we're supposed to be kind of on edge, and I think that now that I've seen it in its totality, I understand why. It's because what I think that they're trying to do is they're trying to highlight, oh, and foreshadow things that we eventually see and hear in the prequel era, in the sense of the Jedi, even in the sequels, because it definitely ties into that. Because the Jedi have, we always keep talking about the Jedi have this dogmatic way of doing things, and they're kind of just beholden to it, that I think that it causes a lot of problems that they don't even realize that they're causing. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what leads to the character motivation, is because in some ways you're not treating people like people. And I think that's kind of the moral of the story. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we look at 8. But they're the ideology of the Jedi does not allow you to be human completely. And I think that's part of what makes you have a lot of these dark side people rebelling and things like that, is because you're not allowing people to be human. They're trying to it's almost kind of like when we watch the struggle with Spock. Once again, here's our Star Trek reference.
Yeah, well,
But
it was bound to come
with
sooner or later, right?
well, so, but when you look at Spock, right, and he's torn because on one hand he's Vulcan, who they're completely about logic, and that's the only thing that they know, and that's what they rule by. However, he does have a human mother, so he does have that emotion, and it's like, well, he wants to be Vulcan in the sense of, but he can't negate the fact that he's also part human.
Right.
And that's the struggle I'm seeing with, and that's what always has been the struggle when you really look at a lot of dark side users, in particular Anakin, um, where you have these emotions and you're taught to shut them off. And how am I supposed to move on and live life and just it completely almost ignore that this side of me exists or these things have happened to me? And so I think that's the character motivation for it all, is like, and especially now, you're dealing with girls, right? Which we all know by, biological standards, women are more emotional than men. It's just the way it was designed, it's the way they're wired, and that's fine. So now you're asking a woman to almost denounce a core part of herself. And I think that's, leads to great motivation.
Yeah, but see, that's not 100% what I'm talking about. I can
Okay.
hang with that part. Because look, even in this episode that we're talking about, episode 7, I got to remind everybody.
Hmm.
um with episode 7, and I always forget the name of the head witch.
Uh, the black one,
Yeah, sort of like
mother.
Amasea or something like that.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Like
say it,
Korra's the other one, but Amasea, yeah, I think it's like that.
and I'm gonna say it.
I,
Yeah,
I always
yeah.
want to
I'm gonna say it,
combine
and I'm gonna
like
say it.
Namaste with Amadeus, and then I could sort of
Yeah,
remember.
exactly.
And I mean, it's
Yeah,
not
it's
like
kind of
it's
that.
that tough of a name to remember. It just I don't know why, but I never seem to remember it. But in this episode, she basically hit the nail on the head, which of course was a little on the nose, but it was basically foreshadowing when she told Saul, like, look, you guys are lining yourselves up for destruction by,
Hmm.
I forgot what the exact line was, but it was essentially saying like your adherence to this code and pretty much you guys just,
This is it's a system versus
yeah,
a family.
you're basically going to one day be the cause of your own undoing or something like that.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
so I think that was, definitely referenced in that. What I'm talking about by character motivations, though, is like 1 minute May's going to help the Jedi, then she wants to kill Saul, then she doesn't, then she does, then she. It's almost like there's just. It wasn't
Yeah.
written very well. You get all kinds of things like that.
Yeah. That part I do agree. I mean, I think with more information that yes, that would make sense. But I think when she gets the information, it's already past when she decides to make a turn.
Yeah,
So
because
that's
she
what
didn't
throws
have
it
any of
off.
the information yet. That's
And
my
prior
point.
to right, yeah,
Because at
it's
first she's like, okay, I'm going to, help the Jedi. And then all of a sudden she goes to try to kill them. And then, she's like, okay, cool. And then all of a sudden she wants to kill Saul. Same thing with Saul. First he wants to, like, as soon as the Jedi are about to meet him, he like speeds off. And this, of course, is trying to reference episode 8, but then he's trying to get the Jedi to his location. It's like, well, wait a second. You can't. That's what I'm talking about when I say that the
mhm,
motivation of the characters is messed up. It's just,
yeah. And you don't there's no explanation of the reason for the change.
exactly. And the change happens randomly. Like,
Hmm.
it's so wishy washy and going back and forth. And of course, some of the other problems. But again, I don't. The story, and this, we've talked about this in the last couple of episodes, mostly arguing with David, but pretty much, just letting anybody else that has those same vibes. Because look, on one hand, I can firmly understand people that just hate the show and want to just trash it or whatever. There
Hmm.
are a lot of problems with it. I mean,
Hmm.
after all, you even remember how just vicious about this thing that you were with episodes 1 and 2 when we were reviewing that. I mean,
Yeah.
it was kind of
Yeah.
uncomfortable because I was
Yeah,
like
man.
sort of okay with it. Like, I'm like, okay, because being that it's the first couple of episodes, wasn't like I didn't think there were any issues with it either. It's just I thought it had potential. I'm like, okay, cool. There's some things that they did that they probably shouldn't have, but it does have potential. And the other thing is that we it was not what we thought it was going to be, in the sense of they promised us a very Sith centric show and then they promised us a bunch of other stuff, and it's none of that. It's really only in a couple episodes. Like, obviously the season finale has a little bit in it. A couple episodes ago, like episode 5, even a little bit of the last episode, because you basically have, Kamir and May, and then Kamir and Osha, and you have these interactions, but it's not really what was promised, and it wasn't even starting to be delivered until later in the season. And then, of course,
Yeah. Well, I think it did in now and seeing it all, like it did give us a lot of Sith things. It's just not the way that we expected it
That's
to
what I'm
be.
talking about. It's not the
Yeah.
way that they promoted it. If they had just said that there was going to be like a furthering of the Sith canon in it, that
Hmm.
would have been a little bit more descriptive of what we're actually getting.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
they were basically implying the whole show was essentially going to be from the dark side point of view, which, I mean, from a certain point of view, you could argue that it is. But,
yeah,
you know, again, you have to be
yeah.
very, very careful about how you describe these things.
But I think that's part of the. I think that's part of the trick with Star Wars, though. I think
It is.
it's one of those things where it's like they don't want you because they don't want you to try to figure out too much,
Well,
and they
that's
don't
one of
want
the
you to, and that's one of the ways they kind of go about doing. No different than, um, even when we watch some trailers, we think like, oh, this is what the movie is about, and then the movie is completely not about that. And you're just like, oh, okay,
well, half the time
and
it's because it was reshot.
well, that's that too.
I mean, you gotta.
There is a precedence for that.
Hmm.
I can't disagree with you on that one. But yeah, I think they delivered, what they promised to some degree. At least on one side of things. I mean, I don't see the whole Indiana Jones archaeological part of at
That,
all.
yeah, exactly.
That
I
part,
know.
nah, I'd see nothing of that.
And again, and I'll tell you this too. I'm glad they reneged on that promise because to me, you have a built-in character already for that in Dr. Afra. It's
After,
like, well, if you're
right?
gonna do a show like that, which by all means I do want to see, then they should just make that a Dr. Afra show and not,
Hmm.
muddy this up. But I mean, I think that, and again, a lot of these things that you're bringing up, having seen the season finale, really goes to a point that I always make on the first episode of whenever we do a show review. I've said this almost every single time we do it. I always say, "Okay, guys," or I might say this like in the episode leading up to it. I always say, "Don't judge the episode by the first couple of episodes. It takes like 3 maybe or so before you really start to get the idea of where it's going." But often, it's when you've seen the show in totality that you look at some of the things that you disliked or thought were stupid about earlier episodes because now you have the context.
Hmm.
And that's, from everything that I've heard, and obviously you have seen, that seems to be not everything, but a good amount of stuff. It really puts a lot of context in some of the things that were criticized early on. But,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are obvious problems. I mean, like I said, with uh, like uh, what's his name? The Wookiee Jedi,
oh, Kelnaka?
um, Kelnaka. Yeah, like okay, him going on a rampage, that was actually kind of cool,
Yeah, that was
honestly.
cool. I didn't have a problem with
However,
that.
but like, okay, the fact that he's kicking walls and it's just like it looked like some bad CG, like the I don't know. It's like I just didn't believe that he's kicking that hard that he's knocking stone like that. I mean, I know Wookiees are pretty strong and all, but I mean, I don't know. It just seemed a little odd.
Well, I mean, you
And
still have a lot of the same problems too, with the sets seem a little bit small and things like that. And I
yeah,
I agree. There's a lot of ways that they handle Kelnaka. Now, Kelnaka is an interesting character because in some respects, I think they actually handle him pretty well. I mean, I'm trying not to. He had a little bit of more of a Wookiee and less a Harry and the Hendersons vibe in this episode. I will admit that. It's still there now,
yeah,
but but it was
yeah.
but it was less. It was less, and I appreciated that. But you know, what else did you? Because you said there was a couple of things that you.
Yeah, I mean, you had Konaka, doing some almost I don't know, like it was it was almost kind of like he was superhuman in a way. I mean, I get he's a Wookiee and I get he's a Jedi, but it's just kind of
Yeah,
like
like
it
their
just
version of the Hulk or something.
yeah, that's like the Hulk or the Thing or something like that. It was just
Yeah.
kind of weird.
But
I didn't care for now I actually like Indira. And I wanted to see more of her and wanted to explore her more. Pause. That sounds a little weird, but
I guess we
but
all do. But yeah, I know.
but no, I like her character. And the it seemed like she was the one who really had the control over everything. And I really wanted to know, like, okay, when it seemed like she was blocking some of the witchcraft that those witches were doing to
Oh
Kalnaka
yeah,
as
no,
far
that's a good point.
and and I was really trying to figure out, like, okay, now what is that? Like, are you because then it seems like she killed the rest of everybody else by doing it. So it's like, were you just blocking them or were you turning it back? Like I had so many questions about
Well, and that's another issue too, right? That she has this power, and why did it suddenly take out all those other witches that were obviously trying to control there was, in other words, there was more questions that it answered. Let me get to these chats before we go on. So, Ted Adam Green, of course. Hey, Daryl, glad you're back. Sorry it was late, guys. Well,
that.
you're all right. You're good.
Yeah, all right, man. I appreciate it.
Uh, David, of course, says the series just needs to end. Their portrayal of being stoic Jedi in this episode was horrible. Trinity was wooden. The rookie Jedi was annoying. Yeah, we'll get to Torben in a sec. He was trying to say
Chewbacca.
Chewbacca, but yeah, that's not how you spell it. I almost read Chewbacabra. Uh, the Chewbacca fight, he means Kelnaka, was bad. Also, it should have been like Broly versus Goku
And
in,
Vegeta.
yeah, but it fell flat to me. And I get that. I honestly get that. Because if you look at the way that some of the choreography, now again, one of the things that this actually brings me to something I thought was supremely cool and something I have enjoyed about this series, about them showing the power of the Jedi. When Torben basically like whipped out his lightsaber and was deflecting all those like arrows and stuff, I'm like,
Yeah,
see, that's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of thing
exactly.
that I want to
Yeah.
see, especially from High Republic Jedi. And it just shows you that even as a Padawan, he was highly skilled. Whereas when we flash forward, well, you got to flash backwards in real time. But when you flash forward in, the future, when May goes to attack him and he's just like meditating and she's just trying to like break through this force field and she can't do it. It's not powerful enough.
Hmm.
You could see that Torben turns into an extremely powerful Jedi, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
And the fight scenes
Yeah,
I thought were good
definitely.
too, you know.
But so and I'm trying to that now the one Jedi that really is annoying to David's point is the guy who keeps running back to Venestra.
Oh yeah.
That's the one that's really annoying. He's just like the little British dude, like he irks my nerves. Um, but as far as Torben, I mean, like, once again, I get it. He's a Padawan. He's overzealous. He wants to prove himself. Like, there's that youth that's in him that makes sense. It makes sense to his character, and that's just naturally going to happen. You got that with Luke. You got that with Ahsoka. You got that with Anakin. That when you're young and dumb, and you have this ability and you have this power, and you feel like, oh, I should be able to, or why can't we just do it this way? Um, that little gopher, Basil, whatever the heck he is, like that little thing is what I don't know whose side he's on sometimes because it's
Well,
kind of
didn't he?
like
I heard that he. And this is something that I've heard. Doesn't he turn into like a traitor or something in the last episode? Like he sells
he
them out or
he
something.
he kind of does something that
Like on the spectrum.
it's yeah, yeah. I guess that's what you want to call it, the spectrum.
I mean,
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
between light and
But
dark, you know.
yeah, exactly. In that little gray area David hates so much. But no, I mean, I think that that's just, like it's weird because he just keeps popping up randomly out of nowhere, almost like he's a spy, but he's trying to like I really don't once again, character motivation. Like I don't know what
It's a
your
thing.
purpose is. Yeah, besides being a tracker, like I don't understand like what your purpose is.
Well, that's the thing that
Um
I have as far as the problem with a lot of the writing of this show is the fact that they don't understand. It's almost like they want to take these characters and these isolated things and they don't understand how they're connecting things. You know,
yeah,
like
into
they
the
want to do that
main.
right into the main storyline or even into the franchise because it just seems like they're motivated by having the character do something cool or
Right.
edgy or whatever without any thought to, hey man, you're not making some sort of standalone series. I mean, you're playing in a pretty big sandbox here. You're like you have a small corner in this thing and you have to respect that. And I really wish that they would do that.
Yeah. I think, with with Seven, him trying to explain things to OSHA. I mean, I mean not OSHA, to May, seeing things will actually happen, as far as him accident, like, you gotta wonder, like, did he kill her on accident?
No, I think what it was, and this is a consensus back when I watched a lot of the YouTubers for this episode, because that's a lot of times I like to do that too. I like to watch the shows to see how other people see it versus how I saw it, which also helps when you and I talk about it because then it's sort of like, okay, well, how do my views differ from a lot of other people and yours as well? And then, of course, we bring our community into it, and that's really where we get a consensus of what's going on. But the consensus, and in rewatching, because I decided to actually try to rewatch this thing before we reviewed it. In rewatching, it almost reinforces it. Is the fact that when she started to do the whole little mist thing or whatever, and it started to surround Osha, she thought that the witch was trying to kill her. And so he was trying to stop her from like hurting her or, doing something. And that's why
So
he,
he was basically unaware of what she
yeah,
was
he was
doing.
right. He just thought, hey, what's going on? Because, she was kind of like, because I think when Cora came in and was like, oh, you're not going to do or whatever. And then that's when, she like did the whole mist thing. And it's like, Saul was just like, well, wait a minute. No, you're not going to do this. And of course, he stabs her and then realizes, because then she was like, well, I was going to let her go with you, and it's like, well, wish I had known that 5 minutes ago kind of thing.
You might want to have, led with that, before you just
Yeah,
start
right,
moving,
exactly. Well, and that's the thing
smoke
that I
all over the
thought too.
place.
Yeah,
you know.
because people were critical of that, and I'm like, well, you can't really blame him for that. I mean, he doesn't know what that's all about. It, it's like you see like
Yeah.
this black smoke surrounding everybody. You're like, I'm going to err on the side of caution, and I think I'm
I
going to
know you're a
do,
witch,
yeah,
and
I'm going to do the
now
little
the
stabby stab.
now one of the things that I really enjoy, and I really want them to, and I know they're going to explore this more, is the whole we finally get the answer of like, okay, Osha and May aren't even sisters
Hmm.
because they're the same person.
Right.
They're just been split, and now a now they keep talking about this whole virgins thing. I'm just trying to figure out like what that actually means. See, they need to explain what that
We
is
all
for
are. Everybody is.
me.
But a lot of what you were saying earlier, too, when you're making some of the points about some of these things, I can't help but think that there's some setup that's happening for season 2.
Definitely. Oh, definitely.
You
Especially
know?
after you see eight.
Well, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I
And
understand that.
Yeah, I mean, and now I do like the fact, and that this is what makes this story interesting to me because now we're talking about, because this once again it ties into episode one when he was like, a virgin, you say, it's like, yeah, it's one that's, so it's like this has happened before. And so now we're starting to make some connective I definitely see it. And now that I've seen all of it, I definitely see the connective tissue between here and episode one a whole lot.
Hmm.
Um, but and it makes you, it shows why they're skeptical about Anakin so much too.
Right.
So,
But here's my problem, because obviously when you saw episode 1, one of
mhm,
the first things that both of us admitted was the fact that, okay, it's a mystery. And this mystery is going to be a season-long story arc. And we're going to
mhm,
continue to get pieces of the puzzle as the mystery unfolds. And that's going to culminate, of course, into the final episode where it's like, oh, and then you start looking back on all the other episodes and you start looking at them a little differently. I mean, that's the typical,
mhm,
thing for, usually if it's done in a movie form, obviously it'd be like the beginning and the end. Or sometimes what they like
mhm.
to do is do that whole, they'll show you like some crazy scene and then pause it and then go 2 weeks earlier. And then, you're seeing all the
Right.
events that lead up, but you know what's going to happen. Well, in this case, they just do the tried and true mystery thing. The problem, though, is the fact that you have to write it in a way that people care. I mean, you
Mhm.
had a major YouTuber in John Campia who was just like, he saw episode 5 and he's like, you know what? Okay, this is probably the best dueling and all that in the franchise. I'll grant them that, but you know what? I'm done. I don't care about this anymore. There's just too many problems with this show, and I'm not even invested. I don't even know which character I'm supposed to be invested in. And that is a legitimate criticism. And
True.
so the problem is that, sure, you get to episode 8, you go, oh, okay, now this all makes sense. But if you get there, they have to do a thing to where they want to make you care. They have to keep you invested
All the
in
way
this.
through. All the
Yeah.
way through. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the things that, when it comes to writing and things like that. I don't think in some ways I think the directing has gotten better,
Oh, it
as we've
has.
gone
Yeah,
along.
I agree with
I
that.
think the directing has gotten better, but I think the writing still is where the problems lie a lot of times in Star Wars from what I've seen for the last few, um episodes of different shows, whether it's Ahsoka, whether it's um whether it's Acolyte, I think that's where the crux of the problem is in the writing and in character development and really fleshing out these characters to make you care. Like we always talk about, and we compare it to Andor. We care about Deidre because we see the struggle. We care about Cyril because we see his rise, his fall, and his now he's trying to find his way. Cassian, we're seeing his struggles. So we care about these characters, even in the whole prison scene with Andy Circus. Like even his character, like we begin to care because we see it and it's well written. The problem is, like you said, with Acolyte and Ahsoka and things of that nature, is that yeah, it's too all over the place without enough depth, but then in sometimes you don't want to have too much where it's not it's drawn out. So
Yeah, but
you
that's where good writing comes in, though, right? You can.
right, and that's what I'm saying. And a good writer knows how to marry the two together, like where you don't have the long drawn out thing of Andor, but you get the big payoff at the end. It's just a slow burn to get there versus like, okay, we need you to get to us to this point quickly but effectively. And that's the problem with, these shows so far.
Well, it actually, and this is especially true with this show. because when you put it like that, it got me thinking about something, that you actually have a double whammy of bad writing if you think about it. The show itself is written poorly, but a lot of the characters are written poorly.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you have poorly written characters in the middle of a poorly written show.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you have the issue, because like you said, in a lot of these, the characters are so, Doug actually pointed out, because he saw episode 8 too, and he was like, now that both of the girls had the same hairstyle and all that, they're so interchangeable. It's like, what's the point of having... It's like, yeah, granted, virgins, they're the same, I mean, they're not like sisters, they're actually kind of the same people, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, they just didn't write it well. That's the thing.
Well, and that's why David says, like, this whole thing needs to die, because
Well,
it's just like,
and
I mean,
speaking,
I understand, and I understand that. Go ahead.
yeah, speaking of David, he comes up with something else. He said, everyone survives being stabbed except the mother and Trinity. The twins being one was anticlimactic. Yeah, I remember. It's funny because over in Ahsoka land, well, you could get stabbed no problem.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people, again, this is bad writing. And of course, all the people that are determined to make apologies for the show will start saying things like, well, in the case of this character, they missed this organ and that or whatever, but, here, that's why they died. It's like, okay, you have a lightsaber piercing through your body. We've seen what this thing could do to a metal door.
Yeah, we don't need to do all of a sudden now to have turn this into Grey's Anatomy or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, look, anywhere that thing pierces through you, it's going to cook your organs. I don't want to hear about this cauterizing the wounds stupidity, because it's cooking your organs. It's going to raise your internal temperature by like 1,000 degrees. Look at what it did to the door in the Phantom Menace. Now imagine that happening inside somebody's body. It just, it's just because they don't know how to write well enough to, well, we'll just stab them with a lightsaber and miraculously they come back.
Yeah, no, like I said, I understand the situation. Like, even like, okay, for example, let's look at episode 2, right? Obi-Wan gets nicked by the lightsaber and, in his leg, and he goes down, like he's out of the fight. All right. Anakin gets his whole arm lopped off. It's still cauterized. I mean, you're not seeing a whole lot of blood, but the arm is gone. Like, his arm is clearly not there. Luke, same thing. His hand gets lopped off. I mean, like, so we, like you said, we know what these weapons can do.
Well, and just to interject for a second, I'll give you the cauterization argument if a limb is hacked off. I'll even give it to you for Darth Maul being chopped in half, because it's not going through the body. That's the problem that I have. If you hack off a limb, yeah, you get a cauterizing effect and everything else. I mean, but you see how powerful this thing is, though. I mean, it just effortlessly cuts through bone and everything else. But when it comes to, like, you stab somebody, I mean, that's just a whole nother level, And of course, that's something that we didn't even see until the Phantom Menace with Qui-Gon.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there is that. All right, so David poses a question. He said, who's the best actor on the show? I ask because nobody can act. You know what? I'm gonna make a surprising thing.
I already know who you're gonna say.
Who am I gonna say? You already know. You know who I'm gonna say. So say it.
The little girls. They were the best ones.
No, but actually, from a technical, you know what? They were probably the second best, honestly. No, believe it or not, I'm gonna say the actor that plays Soul.
Oh, I know you're gonna say that.
Because the guy can't even speak a word of English. And yet, especially if you look at this episode, yeah, I mean, there's some ways that, don't you get the girls, or something. He has this weird way of like pronouncing things, but think of the acting chops you would have to learn a language for a role and then speak that language and emote and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that just takes some acting chops. And of course, we know as an actor how good he is through Squid Game and the one or two other things that Americans have seen him in. So we know he's an amazing actor. So if you're asking me who's the best actor on the show, he is, just based on his other body of work and the fact that he learns his first English speaking role, and he's actually in a lot of ways out acting all these other people who speak English.
That's a valid point. I will also give it to yes, the younger girls who play Osha and May. I really enjoy them.
Mhm.
But honestly, um as I like Vanessa Rowe. I really like she gives me the authority and for the time period, I guess. And she also has the and even Indira though. I do like Indira, as David would call her Trinity. Um I
Yeah, who
like
is that? Is that Carrie Ann Moss or something? Who's the one that plays her?
excuse me.
I don't remember. Uh, so basically, David had asked, we got to put this back up for context. Who's the best actor on the show? I asked because nobody can ask. And then, of course, Ted Adam Green says, David, accurate. So there's definitely criticisms of the acting on this show.
Sure. I mean, I'm not saying
And I
that there
don't,
aren't.
I don't blame them. Because, you're sitting there going, well, who's the best actor? And you're like, well, Basil, maybe.
Yeah.
What's the little droid's name again?
A Pip.
Pip, yeah. You're starting to reach. I don't know, that third tree in the forest was doing pretty well, that kind of a thing. I mean, it's true. Actually, I'll even say that Manny Jacinto or whatever his name is, the dude that plays Khmer, I actually think it's weird. It's not that his acting is very good because it's hit and miss, but his presence is there.
I think they're right. I think they just write him bad. That's all. Once again, I think it goes
That
back
could
to a
be
writing
that
a
could
writing
be.
issue
Yeah,
too.
because I mean, we
I think
talk
they're
about that
just
all the time. We talk about
giving him the
writing,
right dialogue.
well, direction too, right?
Yep.
Could be a directing issue too. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, I suppose if we were maybe more dialed in, like, we went to film school or something, then you can start to really get into some of the technical stuff. But again, I don't really think that that's necessarily a prerequisite for the conversation, simply because it's not a micro conversation, it's a macro conversation. You could probably, like, if you want to get geeky about this, you could probably really get into scene by scene and go, okay, was it bad writing or was it bad direction? Or was it bad acting? It's sort of like, in cameras when you have, pretty much like aperture, shutter speed,
ISO.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you have like those three things, ISO or gain, and the other two where it's sort of like they all play on each other. And very much the same way that happens, writing, acting, and direction are all in there. I mean, if you got a horrible script, you could sometimes maybe overcome that, but it's very difficult. David says, I agree with both of you. Saul is number one, the little girls were number two. Oh, we can quote a line here. He agrees. What's that from? Return of the Jedi?
Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
It's getting bad. Hosting a Star Wars show, it's, it's almost like I love you, I know. Yeah, which one was that again? That'll be us doing this show at 90. Or it's like we actually have to rewatch the original trilogy before we do this stuff, It's like It was a little short droid next to that big gold one. What was that again?
Yeah, exactly. The proper fella. But yeah, I think I think 7, like I said, it had its problems, but it had some good things. Like I said, I think the story ultimately was better. We got
Yeah.
more detailed into the we can dump on this thing all day, but I think that some of the good that's come out of it is is once again the whole reveal of them being not even being sisters, and then so watching him um have that confrontation between he and Indira about like, well, you just want her because you want to have a Padawan, like you want to care and you want to do. He's like, no, it's not about that. I just care about the girls, and it's like, well, you can't allow yourself to. And watching that um struggle and that confrontation between the two of ideology um play out was really good in my opinion. I think watching um Osha kind of like she's kind of teetering, you kind of see like, okay, she's curious, she's wondering about some things, and she's like, all right, I think this is what the truth is, but there's a part of her that doesn't quite believe it all. May trying to really ascertain the truth, and she's really like pushing, so like, okay, well, why didn't you, this the case, then why didn't you say this, why did you blame me, why did you, it's kind of like, or you almost like that whole Vader line, like you made me to be this person. So those aspects of it are were really
Well,
good
and
to me in this.
again, I mean, people have asked me, all right, if you didn't have to review this show every week, would you still watch it? And I mean, I would. I don't know if I would have even given up on it. And the reason is because I am somewhat invested in the High Republic era, and this show takes place during the High Republic era. So, yeah, I would continue watching the show. And again, I mean, it hooks me enough. Like, the story really hooks me. The characters, marginally. I can't honestly say I truly care about any of them, except maybe Soul. I mean, Osha and May kind of leave me flat, to be honest.
Yeah,
There's just nothing really there to latch on to care about. I mean, there's a lot of basic wannabe, Jedi or Sith from the books that would be better. But still, with all
I
that
think if once
said,
you see an 8, though, I think you'll change your mind a little bit.
we'll see. Because like I
Like I
said,
said,
I know everything about 8 because I've watched all these like hour-long spoiler reviews where they break it down scene by scene. And it's like, sure, sometimes when you see it, although they showed the clips too, which
mhm.
sometimes I don't know how they get away with doing that because, we show a trailer for 30 seconds. We get, all these like warnings and flags, and the stream is taken down. These YouTubers are taking, so it's not like this stuff's available on YouTube. They got to be ripping it from like Disney Plus or whatever.
That's because we need more of you to hit the
Yeah,
like
they're.
and subscribe button.
Oh, look at that. A segue. Okay, I'll play. So, yes, be sure to hit that like button. And then, of course, hit the subscribe and hit the notification bell. There you go. There's your. There's your plug for that because it does legitimately help. I mean, and it's nice that we actually have a visual and I'm not just talking about it. But yeah, I mean, and again, I'm sure that just given what I know when I see the thing, there'll be elements of the show, but I still think overall, because one episode's not going to necessarily change my mind about a lot of the other stuff. I am curious on season 2 because this is kind of a spoiler. I mean, look, we know we get that little Plagueis reveal, so
Mhm.
it's that part. I think what they're doing is obviously setting up what they want to do for season 2. And Headland basically did say that now she wants to start bringing Palpatine into it. And I I hate the fact that she's the one that's doing this story. It's like, okay, this is a
Especially one of your favorite characters of Palpatine too. It's just
yeah,
like
and that's where David's gonna blow a gasket too, though.
David, because David idolizes Palpatine. He's
That's
like the
the
go-to.
thing.
So.
I mean, I think David's gonna have a worse reaction than I am, but it'll be pretty bad. Unless, of course, but again, I don't want to get down on Headland too much because she's not the one that directed a lot of these episodes. I don't know if she wrote a lot of them either.
She was producer.
Yeah, and
she's just a showrunner.
And she came up with the basic concept and all that. But yeah, so I mean,
concept and stories and kind of.
Well, I'd be curious on what would it be like if she did take the helm on some of this stuff. Did Russian Dolls? I mean, she's done stuff that people like and that is well received by critics. So, of course, that doesn't mean anything. Look at what Rian Johnson did. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, look, we're going to review episode 8 on Sunday, by the way. So you're only like 2 days away from us actually reviewing, and as David will be happy about finally putting this series to bed. But I don't know. I just think that wherever they go with it, like I said, I mean, the story part of it, I'm usually engaged in. I just don't know. It just seems like once it gets off of the page and onto the screen, that's where it somewhat breaks down. Yeah, that's where I think some of the troubles start. The other thing that, I mean, just to wrap it up for a final thing before we give our ratings and all that, because there's another little piece of this that we didn't mention.
Okay.
I felt was really out of place was the ending music.
Man,
the heck was that all about?
What was that, man? And it's funny because I thought about it earlier in the show and I meant to bring it up and I didn't.
I know. I was thinking about it too, and then I forgot about it.
This, and I'm like, man, am I having another stroke again? What the heck is this? That was so weird.
Up here. You're like going back to the pill bottle. Like maybe I need another one of these things because I'm thinking I'm hearing like some sort of weird hip hop thing and
yeah, that was
or like so pop or whatever it is. Yeah, it really was.
I mean, and I was like, I'm glad they saved that for like literally the very end, like the credits. Because had that been in the actual show, I would have been like Campia. I'd have been like, I'm out. Because now this is not even Star Wars anymore. This is whatever
and that's the other thing, I'm disappointed by the fact that this is the first representation of the High Republic era too.
Yeah.
Now, granted, they did do us a little bit of a solid by at least making it like the last part of it. So they still pretty much left the main section of the High Republic untouched, right? Like it's there.
The
like the zenith of it, the prime of it or whatever. This is kind of toward the end. This is when the High Republic is going to start to resemble the prequel era a little bit more. And that's really what Headland's whole thing is, right? She's trying to bridge the two eras together.
Yeah, but yeah, I definitely see it, and it's funny because even some of the robes definitely remind me of Star Trek. Like it has a very Star Trek.
It has a vibe to it. It has a very
look to it.
You're right, 60s, like a modern version of the 60s Star Trek series. Yep. That's what this whole show feels like.
Exactly.
And it shouldn't.
Exactly. Yep. I know.
All right, well, what are you going to rate this thing?
Out of 10, I'll give it...
Like I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10.
5.
All right. I'm gonna give it like a 6. Okay. I'm gonna give it a 6 because there were some things that I liked about it. Like I liked Torben's whole thing. I even liked it, and this is something that people were criticizing it, but I thought it was a little bit. Well, let's put it this way. there are certain things because of the nature of what Star Wars is, sci-fi fantasy, that they basically leave out. But you're going, well, these people would have to do this or think this or whatever. And that's when Torben started getting homesick and saying, it's like, look, dude, we've been here for like 7 weeks. I want to go back to Coruscant,
Yes,
and you can, that's a realistic thing. Now, granted, there are people that I think would say, well, that's the whole point. It's not supposed to be realistic. This is Star Wars. But to me, that actually goes into character motivation again. Because part of the reason why Torben was susceptible to the witches, part of the reason why he was somewhat the way he was, is because he just had such an attachment to home. And it was like, okay, I'm cool with doing this Jedi thing, but it's almost like, look, man, been here since 9. It's like 5:30. It's time to punch the clock and put the lightsaber away, and I'm gonna go home and watch the galactic version of Friends or something. So, I like that. Exactly. I like that, and that's part of the reason why. Because I was all set to do the same thing as you, is give it a 5. But when we were talking about, I'm like, well, I kind of like this, and that's sort of cool too, and. So I'll give it a 6, but still, that's not much more. It's not like I'm giving this thing an 8 or something.
Yeah, 5 is really just because of the story, the fact that we got the reveals and things like that, and we saw some of that cool stuff. So I think that's what really drove it home for me.
All right, well, that's good. I mean, we got another episode down. One more to go. One that you've seen already. I'll actually. Instead of getting the entire Cliff's Notes version. Of course, that's a reference people nowadays probably don't even get half the time.
Exactly.
Like anybody under like 30, yeah. Right, they're like, who? What? The abbreviated version. I can finally watch this thing, and we'll actually review it, and we'll give our thoughts about the episode. We'll probably include a little bit of a season wrap-up in there, too. Just to kind of end the show with, okay, this is our overall thoughts on the season, and this is what we'd like to see from season 2. We used to do a whole show dedicated to that, but that gets kind of awkward. I think it'd be better to just make that a part of our last episode show, even if the show goes a little longer. So Sunday night, 8 o'clock, we'll be live reviewing the final episode. Because I hated the fact that we had to do this episode after 8 was released. It's like, I didn't really want to do it, like I said at the beginning of the show. I didn't want to do like a dual episode kind of thing. I could have done, I think it was Dragonfly. Because we had had to move our Monday show to Tuesday, and that's when we were talking about the Acolyte, and he was all like, hey, you're going to just review, are you just going to stay on and just go right into the next episode or something? So... we could have almost done that. I could have almost did like a dual thing, and then it's like, all right, well, now we're talking about episode 8 and made it like a double show. But in the interest of our playlist and future viewers, we'll just leave it at this. And remember, again, hit the like, hit the subscribe buttons. We got a Discord. I was just on Call of Duty like an hour ago. You guys could have been joining me for that game on our Discord channel. We have a lot of different things that we talk about in there. We continue the discussion there. We continue it on our social media sites. We got @head-to-head SW for Facebook, formerly Twitter, now X, and Instagram. So be sure to hit us up there. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us until Sunday night. With that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.